This is digital insecurity, once again pointing out the obvious. We've gone down a path. Rather than standing up for ourselves, we're so far down the path that they think we can now be manipulated like puppets. And the puppetry continues. As we know, the show we're watching called The Government is mere manipulation fueled by blackmail and has taken down every basic constitutional right that we thought were guaranteed. Now, as a reminder, the Constitution is not a list of freedoms that we have, right? The Bill of Rights and the Constitution stand up for what the government shall not do against its people. So it isn't about us demanding our freedoms, it's about us demanding that the government do not infringe on those freedoms or that the government be disbanded. I'm bringing this up today because finally, for the first time in the year and a half, our beloved library opened because cooties is really dangerous around books. Stop the education. And again, I'll point out that my child was not allowed to go to school, but could go to a city-run learning pod as long as no education actually occurred at that facility. He could bring a computer and learn virtually somewhere else, but they could not hire teachers and they could not actually educate or tutor the children on site. Yet they could gather together. They just couldn't do it out of school. At what state do we stand up and say BS? This is by April of last year, we knew that, wait a minute, this might not be 100% what we're told it's going to be. By May, we had learned the facts. Fauci learned the facts. Our government learned our facts. Countries around the world learned the facts, and yet the game was still played out. Billions of people continue to put masks on. Absolutely despicable that anybody would think that a mask on your face was helpful in any way. You are a healthy individual, you put a mask on your face. That's not keeping out cooties. But you know what it does do? Blocks your oxygen intake. And one of the biggest factors in those who get cancer is a reduction in access to clean oxygen. We are tracking the cancer rates as well over the next few years. But beyond that, as I was standing outside talking to individuals and the warm weather picked up and the pollen picked up, people were standing around me with masks on, sneezing because the pollen was getting through. The pollen is thousands of times larger than the cooties molecule. And yet they thought the mask was protecting them. At what point are people going to wake up? So back to today. I'm in the library for the first time in a year and a half because finally it is safe to enter the building. And yet as I'm leaving, I'm very politely being told by what has become a friend at the library, because we would go multiple times a day even at the library during the summers and through the week, several times a week. And we've done that for years. 40 some years to be exact. I've gone through many retirement parties over at the library as they've aged out and decided to choose another path. And then the younger ones come in with less benefits and lower pay and less hours and not as good a scenario for them. But meanwhile, one of them stepped up and said, I noticed you didn't have a mask on, and I do want you to know that on Tuesday, they're going to start us wearing masks again. And I said, did the county come up with that? And she said, yeah, it's coming down from the county. I said, but yeah, I just listened to the CDC on Friday announce that they are not in alliance with different cities, states, and counties that are moving forward with more mask mandates. They're against it. And of course, she said, don't shoot the messenger. And as she's standing there today with a mask on. If you don't stand up by something basic, like being able to see the facial expression of another individual, being able to breathe in clean oxygen, not cover your face so that facial expressions can be seen, And for those individuals who have a challenge hearing, like myself, I cannot read lips when a mask is on somebody's face. Now, what about now buying that mask for your child? Child abuse. It's gone beyond this. So why have I pulled this up today? Again, just an awareness conversation. Cooties is so bad in this world that it has attacked the most vulnerable. Who have been identified as the most vulnerable? Primarily, they've identified two groups of individuals. One, the elderly, of which they all lock together in rooms and put cooties patients out of the hospitals into these facilities with the quote unquote most vulnerable, and didn't even allow family members in to see them during that period of time or let them out for fresh air because that would be dangerous. They might escape. Now, what is the next step that we have here? They said obesity is the next step. So you've got somebody who's got a lot of nutrition in their body, and maybe they're not eating optimally, but they're not at the other end of the scale of skin and bones where they're not getting any nutrition. And yet this is our most popular. Somehow they have access to food, which means on some level they have funds for food. Then on some level, they have access to medical, right? There's a flow here. And yet those are the two, what we're told were the two most acceptable populations. Well, by April of last year, I was saying time out on this. First of all, allow the family members to go home that are locked in and elderly, and the hospitals are dispersing to those in specific cities. But those are not the most vulnerable. The most vulnerable are those who were coming over the border, who came from areas who didn't have medical benefits, more or less medical attention, more or less medical aids to help keep them healthy, or vitamins or nutrients. In fact, hand washing stations were not part of the path. Often restrooms were not provided. These individuals in these scenarios often traveled in mass groups, and many tested positive on there's another conversation that we learned this week. The antibodies testing tool that we had was recently bought out by some individuals who should not own that company. And we already know that the PCR testing was turned so high that even, what was it, a piece of cheese and a goat passed for cooties. So we already know that the lies have spurned way past any degree of scientific application. But we do know that these individuals passing over our borders who do not have basic medical care, who seem to test positive and are moving in, you can call them caravans up to that line, and then by plane or bus or whatever situation past that, are a lot more vulnerable than you and I sitting in our fancy homes. What is another group that is a bellwether? The homeless. So immediately last April, I started reaching out to some of my contacts who work daily with the homeless population, or underhoused, or whatever category you want to look. And many of them had at that point lived in something known as the Jungle. It was a neighborhood, quote unquote neighborhood, that was set up along a creek bed, filthy, unsanitary, right in the heart of Silicon Valley. And there were hundreds of individuals who lived there in squalor positions with no bathrooms, no hand sanitation, whatever structure that they popped up to keep. We don't really have rain here, and it might get hot in the day, so they're under, but whatever they could piece together, meaning, bless their hearts, these beautiful human souls were not the ones going to the doctors regularly, having prescription medicines if needed, or being monitored health-wise. These people were literally living day by day. So I asked, I said, you know, my heart really goes out to the homeless population, and especially this community living over in the jungle. And I was told I was off. It was closer to 1,000 people that live there. And I said, how are they faring with cooties this year? And she said, surprisingly, nobody has it. And I said, well, wait a minute. What do you mean nobody has it? Well, she said they'll run tests through and people will come testing positive, but nobody has any symptoms. I said, well, that's a relief. What about those who are passing from it? Because I saw on the news that those communities are just being devastated right now. She says, no, not one. Well, that was early on, so you got to give them credit. So I contacted about 3 months later when we were in the depth of it and the whole world had shut down. And I contacted, I reached out to several different contacts whose different areas had been shut down because they couldn't work and support anymore. But free food was abundance, cash was flowing. Many were brought into hotel situations, really switched into more of a cush lifestyle. And yet many still lived on the streets. And I asked again, how are they doing with this? Not one had passed from it. And now this is amazing to me because by then we already knew that anybody who passed during that period of time was automatically labeled as that particular, because they could get, what was it, $39,000 per individual if they treat. So they were lying. And yet tied to those populations, they weren't even lying about them getting it. So here we've got two major population groups who may test positive, and there is question around why they are testing positive, but are not passing from a global pandemic that has shut down the entire planet. And a year and a half later, all libraries, schools are shut. And as they're slowly opening, they're moving towards masks again on the faces. And why masks? Because, hey, if you're going to put a mask on your face, and more so you're going to put a mask on your child's face, what's one more step towards the injection in the arm? And I heard somebody say last weekend that if you haven't gotten it yet, they just haven't given you the right reason yet. So have you ever gone through sales training and they say that it takes so many no's to get to a yes? Well, they don't randomly just no, 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 yes. Sales organizations strategize the psychology of individuals from a social engineering perspective of deep manipulation so that they can get to that yes no matter what, and they can get there sooner. So if they haven't given you the right reason yet, that right reason is still being created. And don't you know how beautiful that this is? With all our social media companies tracking us, taking all our information, knowing what we like and what we don't like, where we spend most of our time, where we spend most of our money, all of that's pulled together. They know your weak spots. They will come up with the solution. If you stop with the masks, you're going to stop the process from the next. But as long as we continue to cover our faces and live in silence, we are saying, yes, we are weak people. We will not stand up for ourselves. And you can tell us to do whatever you want, and we will do it to ourselves. You don't even have to do it to us. We will sign up. We will fight. We will push others over just so that we can follow the laws that you lay out before us. How far off the path of freedom have we come? Our Bible taught us, as the people were freed from Egypt, coming into a land of their own, they finally had the ultimate freedom and a God who guided them. The Bible as a book of our history. People may question the stories here or the outcomes there or the characters here. But when we get to the core of the stories, even if we look at it as a parable, we are now realizing the truth. But even if we look at it as a parable, what we're finding out is God led his people from Egypt to the promised land. And yet when his people were free, not only was the slavery so much, many wanted to stay in slavery. And not only was the journey too long, many wanted to stop and did stop along the way so they could raise cattle on this fine land or establish themselves here and just not have to go further, but promise at the end they would scoop up and help the others. And they really didn't. And yet their God promised them that they would have freedom. And ultimately, when they got to the promised land and they had their freedom, one of the first things they did, they wanted a king. And God came back and said, tell them that they do not want a king. And they demanded a king. And so it was Samuel who went out after explaining to them that you do not want a king, you do not want a ruler. You will then be shaving off the top of what you have to an individual to tell you what to do. You will be funding this. It will be the same pathway as the slavery you just came from. And yet they demanded a king. So God allowed them to have a king. And God blessed Samuel to go out and find a king. God pointed out a king, and look where we are today with that. Fast forward several thousand years, and we are demanding the leadership. And even in the face of a leadership that is massively corrupt, who does not deserve the seat of the office, more or less stole it, is manipulating our lives and has made taxes clearly over the 10% that the Bible has taught us is authorized. As no man should put themselves above God, and God's tithe is at 10%. Taxes should never be over 9.9%. And yet add up the taxes that you pay, not only before you get your paycheck, what the employee taxes are, or if you run your own business, what all those taxes come out to be. But what about every time you spend your dollar? What is the tax every time to give a business the right to take your money? You're paying somewhere between 6% and 12% on top of that as the sales tax. And that business is paying a tax to stay open, and a permit tax, and a license tax, and a fire truck tax, and a this tax. What about the death tax? What about the taxes on the money that you save in the bank? The wealth tax, the dividend tax, the interest tax, everywhere we turn around. How much money are you actually taking home today? As I drove across the United States, I looked and I saw which states have disposable income, which ones have boats and they're taking their kids out on the weekend to have fun, and which ones, like California, the disposable income is long gone. Even for those who have boats still, I've seen them parked in their yard and not moved for over a decade. As gas prices started to soar, work became unstable, and taking time off was not permissible, because if you took time off, somebody else got that job. There's no disposable income or disposable time in California. And that means time away from God. That means time away from your family, and just peaceful time with yourself, enjoying this beautiful earth that we've been gifted. And if we can't wander outside and enjoy the planet, enjoy the blue sky with the white clouds, those cute puffy clouds through the chemtrails, or the beautiful trees, listening to the birds. The bees that had been mostly chased away last year were so blessed, came back in abundance this year. But we are blessed that that occurred. I certainly was not counting on that. So we move back today to walking in the library and being told starting Tuesday, this library that just opened is going to start demanding that people wear masks again. So I pulled this up. This article was actually from a year ago. Have LA's homeless people dodged a COVID-19 catastrophe? This is LA Times. And this is, again, this was August 21st, 2020. So we're looking at 11 months ago. When the COVID-19 pandemic erupted, advocates predicted that a time bomb was about to go off in the homeless community, as is obvious. Many homeless people live under conditions worse than those of a refugee camp, with health problems that predispose them to severe illness. Researchers feared they succumbed in high numbers to the worst ravages of the disease. Because remember last year how bad we were told this was. But the powder keg had yet to go off by the end of last summer. There has been little spread of the cooties in LA street encampments, and some shelters have had outbreaks, but most of the infected had no symptoms. And here it goes on to say, of the more than 1,300 cases among the homeless in LA County is one of the most populous homeless groups in California and therefore in the United States. Fatalities by mid-August had been at 31. And again, it's questioning how many of those were actually cooties. And mortality rate, though, at this number was comparable to or even better than the overall population. It's absolutely amazing. An influential early paper estimated the numbers were likely to go as high as 400 deaths and 2,600 hospitalizations. And yet, nope, this was a bellwether. We were living a lie. Checks and balances didn't check out. And here's one point. So I wanted to go back here. Santa Clara County, 3rd California county turns mask recommendation into mandate. Just a recommendation into a mandate. We're going to make you do it. Now, meanwhile, I still go to a church that I don't know what their fine is. The last I was told was $3.5 million, and it was still growing. I don't even know what the the amount has been calculated there. And yet with almost 2,000 people, we gather weekly, well, multiple times a week. And during those times that we gather, we have unfortunately lost many people to this situation, but it has not been one to cooties. And unfortunately, 3 recent just to the jab in the arm. And yet we're told there's no correlation. And the effects were instant. So here we go, Bay Area mask mandates could come as early as next week. It's just a suggestion. We're going to make you do it because we live in a world of Nazis. COVID Delta variant may spur new Bay Area masks. That was 19 hours ago. What have we learned about the Delta variant or the Lambda variant or the Zeta variant, which I haven't announced yet, but believe me, it's on the path. They're just making this shit up. And at some point, call BS. What they have found about the Delta variant is, yes, viruses grow and change, just like you and I. We adapt to our environment. We want to thrive and stay alive. We grow. But as each variant grows, just like humanity, it's actually scientifically shown that we are not getting brighter. We are not getting stronger. The chaos theory has set in. And the older we get, gravity sets in. We were perfect when we were created, and there's a de-evolution that is occurring. With bacteria and viruses, there's a de-evolution that occurs. At most, it's held in a perfect state. It gets introduced, and as it's passed on, the mutations weaken it. And this is what the truth is about Delta and Lambda and all the others are throwing at us as more lies. And yet, the county appears to be ready to take a hard stand on this situation and cooties precautions. Just this week, the county reinstituted a mandate for employees to cover up their faces and be silenced regardless of their status. Even if you went through, and quite honestly, if you were that stupid to put the poison injection directly into your bloodstream, even if you were that stupid, and for many people, you not only did it once, you did it twice, and you had your children 12 years and up do it too. Out of fear, not out of truth, not based on science, but based on being conditioned for decades that we need to have this crap in our systems. And then with the lies that were in our face over the last year and all the facts that were actually presented, people still chose fear over freedom. And we know in this world that there's two doors in life. One door is marked security and one door is marked freedom. And for all of those who choose a path of security, whether it's career or choices or whatever it is, security collapses. Freedom takes us to the promised land. All of those who chose to put poison into their arm because of fear, meaning this would give them security, have been fools. And yet they progress because of that. We say vote with your dollar, because clearly we know our voice doesn't count when we go to the box. And yet for everyone who got a free upgrade to their bloodstream, that shit ain't free. Your medical system paid for it, your government paid for it, all these dollars that were printed out of nothing paid for that. And because they transferred that wealth into the pockets of these criminals who created this, the criminal spree has grown greater and greater and greater because millions, hundreds of millions of people decided, that's probably the safer way to go. And now the next time something comes around, the propaganda and the marketing and the attacks and the shutdowns will be even that much stronger, because this time you said, probably the safer way to go. And it's absolutely no different than what we're seeing down at the line between this country and the next country. Every single one of those living souls that comes across the border, every single one has a price on their head. The cash that we give them once they get here is already promised to people who do very, very bad things. And yet we want to continue to roll out the red carpet and participate in the trafficking and abuse of humanity under a term of democracy that all people have a right to freedom. This isn't freedom for these individuals. What it is indentured servitude for them, and horrible what is actually physically happening. And while it's not helping them, it's not helping us either, because it's taking our foundations, putting them on sand, and blasting away any standing that we had is being eroded right now. So as we look at this, regardless of whether or not somebody's been so stupid as to put the injection directly into their bloodstream once or twice, it doesn't matter. You're still going to need the Microsoft-backed passport. You're still going to have to cover your face again. And they're actually threatening. And this is what we've said for a year and a half. And even as of last weekend, I had a lawyer argue with me that this will never, ever, ever, ever happen in California. And it says right here, Santa Clara County will soon require employees to get vaccinated or lose your job. And you know what I say to that? Walk away. And yet if somebody was willing to put the mask on, and if somebody was willing to put poison directly into their bloodstream based on lies, not even the truth, then how is that person going to walk away from the income that's supporting themselves and their family? But you better grow some balls at this point and stand up, because this isn't working. And because you cowered, the rest of the communities are falling now too. So as we see the truth here, let's look at the truth here. What happened this last week? We're still seeing massive numbers of tests picking up cooties in the individuals crossing. And even if only a few had it, They corral them together in warehouses or holding tanks, whether it's the military facility that they're sneaking them into in Texas, or the airlines that we've been notified for almost 4 months now don't even bother stopping at the border. They just pick them up down south of Guatemala and fly them up and over, because why bother stopping when nobody cares? So they're putting them all in a metal tube. And by the way, statistics show again a very small percentage is coming anywhere north of Guatemala. That means from that country south is where most of them are coming. And even of that, it's not a great amount of those people who are walking. These individuals are well funded. And more than that, these individuals are not just coming from South America, they're coming from all over the planet. From places that have people that do not have our, to say it lightly, do not have our same outlook, foundation, or values. And to be more distinct, are very clear that some individuals should not be on this planet that happen to live in this country, are being just welcomed on in. How are they getting from all over and flown? They're not going by boat or plane or car. How are they being flown from all over the planet into these holding facilities, traveled up through our southern neighbor and into our country? Who is funding all these flights? Who is funding the gas, the fuel? Who is funding, you get it? There's a whole chain here. Our intelligence agencies that I have pointed out on previous videos are watching it. They know the answers. And yet, if we look at what the southern border of the US actually is, how many miles that is? What is the border of Guatemala? What, I don't know. Does that take, from end to end? I think it's less than San Francisco to Los Angeles. I'd heard somewhere around 500 miles. I don't know if that's it, but it's, 4 or 5 hour drive if you had a car from end to end. That would take nothing to secure up. And yet many are just being flown over anyways. Every time a plane lands, it is filled with individuals. And if only 1 or 2 has it, then it's going to spread. But what we've seen is they're not dying. If these people aren't passing from this global pandemic and the homeless are not passing, then do you and I think we need to sit in our beautiful homes with masks on and be afraid of this world? No, we are human beings. The body is very resilient. Will we get sick? Yes, some have. I have. Will we die? Unfortunately, some will. There is an expiration date on our existence. But the numbers, as we look year to year, last year, it is estimated that about 1% of the US population passed. If we look at the year before that, it was also about 1%. If we look at the year before that, it was also about 1%. So why during a global pandemic shutdown with mass homelessness and mass border run-ins, were we not at 10, 30, 60% like we were told to be wiped out? We were on par. They were just classified as something else to build up the numbers, but the numbers didn't change the core numbers. So here, what do we have? The Department of Justice 20 hours ago sued Texas because the governor, who is standing up for you, who is standing up for me, who is standing up for our families, and is standing up for this planet, Governor Abbott, placed an order, an executive order, on cooties carrying migrants, that if they have it, they cannot be transported by buses, meaning they're not taking one bus and putting one, they're taking an individual or 10 who have tested positive for cooties and putting them into a bus as crowded as they possibly can. And we've seen some of these, holding on for your dear life just to squeeze inside. Or even if there's just one per seat and you've got one person in there with cooties, if it really is a pandemic, he's saying, don't transport them. If somebody has it, you get them treatment, you keep them isolated, just as we all had to do. If you have it, you're isolated for 2 or 3 weeks, depending on what part of the country you're in. If you didn't have it, you had to test. If you traveled to a new area, you still had to, a not sick person, but a well person, still had to quarantine for 2 weeks, not being sick. So Abbott is saying, hey, call it what it is. If you're telling us masks and you're telling us injections, then I'm saying if somebody tests positive under your tests, then they're not to get in a bus with a whole bunch of other people and be transported across the United States. And so the Department of Justice, the absolutely corrupt organization of our federal government, not of elected officials, but rather primarily of lifetime people who feed at the trough, have decided that Governor Abbott, you are wrong and we are right. It's disgusting, the lies that we're living under. And here, Yahoo News announced 3 hours ago, a Border Patrol agent claimed that DHS is releasing migrants with cooties into border towns. These border towns are so inundated right now. You know, I've had some conversations right now, and they'll come back and say, you know, no, the news isn't right. It's not portraying it. There's really not a problem here. And I'll say, you know, blessings that is wrong. And then I'll ask a few more questions. I'll say, you know, have there been, you know, any more interactions or any other problems on the streets? And they'll say, well, we have a really high death count due to drugs that are coming across the border. Or they have the children still can't go to school because it's not safe. And yet these individuals coming across the border are being educated in groups, which is known as a school. Or they'll say that, you know, all these restrictions that have been put on them, and then they start thinking about it and they realize, wait a minute, we haven't seen the passing of individuals we were told, but we're still dealing with the numbers and the restrictions, and nothing else is checking out before that. So as you're reaching out, and I encourage it, call the hospitals and ask them if it's true. Call the people at the border if you know anybody and ask them. But don't just ask, hey, is this true? Ask a few more digging questions, because often individuals are doing the best they can and they haven't even realized that the dots are in fact connected. So that's what we have for today. This is absolutely, I use the word inexcusable, but that even doesn't even touch on it right now. We know the show that we call the government is beyond corrupt. We know we're living under conditions of communism. The pot is boiling and we're inside. It slowly got turned up to the point that we didn't even realize we were in a boiling pot. So at this point, if you haven't already made a choice, this isn't about choosing between security and freedom if you didn't make the right choice before. Because if you can't make the right choice for yourself, start thinking about the community we live in and what you want to leave to your children. Do you want to leave to your children and your grandchildren a world of extreme debt and poverty where we own nothing? Do you want to leave to your children that every time they leave their home, they have to put something to cover their face like they're a criminal? Do you want to leave to your children that they are not allowed to have people over to their house? Do you want to leave for your children that they cannot be educated? And in fact, the schools last year pushed to not have any kind of tutoring because that would be unfair to those who got the extra attention. So the bar was dropped all the way to the floor. Did you hear it hit? Do you want to leave this planet knowing that the next generation was in a world where it was illegal to be educated? Do you want to live in a population where every time somebody says jump, you literally say how high? Or when somebody says jump off the cliff, you run and jump? That's not the world that planet Earth was created for. We are the chosen people. We have a right to stand up for ourselves, because if we're not going to stand up for ourselves, we have no right to turn our eyes to God and ask God, please save us. God, please protect us. When God has provided us food and clothing and shelter and housing and families, and all we do is move like sheep. Whatever poison, whatever law, whatever leader says, we jump and we do. It is time to draw the line. Start using your own brain. Take a stance. Make choices that are based on facts that are supportive to you, your family, and community. This needs to stop now. Stand up for yourselves. Stand up for your world, and stand up for your community. And from my heart to yours, love and blessings to this planet, because when the United States falls, so will the rest of the planet. It's up to us to stand up. In God's name we pray. Amen.